Hey everyone, my name is Justin Woodring and this is Computing Science with Justin Woodring. Today I want to talk to you about Capibara. Now, Capibara is a project I've been working on for some time now, so I'm really excited to show it off to you. But before I really get into the nitty gritty, I kind of want to walk through why it came to be in the first place. So let's just start off with just humor me and kind of through a random task type thing that caused me to design this entire process in the first place. So it's just another day of programming in random languages for me, and today I've decided that I'm going to do some socket programming in C. Now, why socket programming? I don't know. It's something to do. It's kind of bare bones. It's about as low as the networking stack goes, for and large, with most programming languages. So we're going to write a basic client server socket thing in C, right? So that's what I've got on my mind for today. And naturally, because C is hard and nobody remembers all the socket stuff, the first thing we're going to do is go look up an example. So if you're like me, typically that ends up leading you straight to the Geeks for Geeks webpage where you're copying a bunch of source code. So it looks something like this. And you're like, okay, cool, copy. And then you go back to your code. So now we're going back to the code and we're here and we're like, okay, cool, I got all my codes. I'm gonna paste that all in there. That's neat. And then let's just start looking through the code. And by the way, there was no endorsement for Geeks for Geeks. That just actually happens to be the story of how I ended up with this project. So, yeah, we're looking through here and we're like, okay, I see some inet pitons, whatever that is. I see htons, whatever that is. Socket makes sense, kind of, because we're creating a socket, I guess. What do all these functions do? Even the web page that I copied this from won't explain what these things do, it just uses them. Now, that's frustrating for a person who actually wants to understand what's happening. So, really, that is kind of the foundation of where this project even came from in the first place. And now I'm going to show you a bit of what Capybara really embodies in all of this. And we're going to go straight to extensions here. We're going to go over here, install this right here. And then we're going to go back to our socket project, downloaded these Capybara definitions, and we're going to hover over this. And then it tells us exactly what htons does. So all this stuff, this is not multiple people's work. This is literally just my work. This is intended to be crowdsourced, but I can just say that like this documentation here, I wrote this myself. This function was the reason I built this project. So we're going to go a little bit more into what even just happened, because a lot happened. I just downloaded an extension and hovered over some text and something happened. What does all this mean, right? So let's really dive into the Capybara stack. What is Capybara? And the first place to start off with that is the Capybara website. So we're on the Capybara website. It's available at Capybara Tools. So right up here, and I'll post it in the description because you probably can't see that. But basically, I mean, let's be honest, the website, I think, when I made it, summed it up pretty well. Capybara is open source, crowdsourced C library documentation and tooling for today's developers. But what does that mean, right? So Capybara is crowdsourced C library documentation and plugins for your favorite editors like, well, we just use VS Code, Vim. And recently, I can say I added support for Emacs. So what does all of this mean? Well, or really, how does it work, right? So we're going to, this really kind of puts it into steps, but even still, let's talk a little bit more about the underlying aspect after that. But a brief overview at least would be that someone's going to contribute documentation for a C library. All of that documentation gets parsed into a fat JSON file. And then the JSON file is made available on this website, and you can download it using, well, really curl or anything else. And from there, plugins can basically search that documentation that's now in a compressed JSON file for data, and you can do stuff like look up string and copy, which is shown in this little GIF right here, or really a bunch of other things. I looked up, for example, htons, in the Capibara tool. So there are really a lot of different moving parts there, and to sum it up, there's the actual repository of information, there's the website, there's the Capibara processor, which takes the repository of information and compresses it into a fat JSON file, and then there's the actual plugin that we installed into VS Code. So that's like 5 or 6 different things. And we can really get a better overview of this if we move over to the GitHub. So Capibara Tools is actually its own project on GitHub. And what we have here is basically, really this kind of explains what each individual component does, right? So the Capibara Capi is the actual repository of C library documentation, and it's formatted in YAML files. The processor is the part that I just mentioned that basically formats it into a fat JSON file. The Capibara website lets you search the fat JSON file and provides a nice UI, and I'll show you that in a second. And then we've also got the actual plugins themselves, which each one of these actually includes a little GIF of it working, so you can look at what they look like, kind of. But that's an overview of what the different moving parts of this project are right now. So if we want to go dig into the Capibara Capi, then we can see that there's a couple different really header files. So like if you're familiar with C at all, then you'd say, okay, I see stdio. So if I go into stdio, then I see a bunch of things here, and then I'll look for f and printf. So Capibara basically supports the different types of things that you can define in C, which is going to be functions, macros, enums, structs, and type definitions. Each one of those has basically each one has a 2-character abbreviation that is actually used to basically link all this stuff together, and I'll show you a bit more of that in a second. But just kind of like this indicates it's a function, obviously. So if we go in here, we can see that it basically has some kind of format. And a macro looks a little bit different than an enum, which looks a little bit different than a struct. But all around the struct, a struct is going to have the same fields as a different struct, with its same YAML things. So each one has its own kind of schema, but a struct has the same type of schema as another struct, basically, is what I'm trying to say. So this one is obviously a very long one, but what this ultimately supports is we have a summary, we have a return type, parameters, description, and then we even have code examples, which is also a relatively recent addition. We also have associated, and then OS affinity. So OS affinity is basically another way of saying what kind of environment you'd find this in, like Windows or Unix or the standard library in this case. And if we look at some of these other files, you may see there's actually, doesn't show any in this particular file, but for example, if we look at, let's see, like IOF, okay. So here we have this particular kind of format indicator here, which basically, this can actually be parsed as a link that by plugins or the Capibara processor. So basically, this is a macro called IOFBF, which basically says full buffered IO write out for the set VBuff format on a stream. Yeah, I know, that's a lot. But this is just kind of like looking at one random thing that I documented here at some point. So what I'm trying to show you right now is this kind of like hyperlink type thing. So basically you can point at this other function, it references the other function, and in the case where you're using something like, if you're using something like this, if I do IOFBF, if you basically look at this right here, you can see that there's basically these little kind of like links, and they show up, you can click them and they'll take you to the Capibara Tools website. And so I'm trying to indicate here is that basically the plugins can use these, or the Capibara processor can use these to reference other objects that are defined in the within Capibara. So, or definitions, as I put it. You can reference other definitions in Capibara. So going back to the actual browser so we can really explore a bit more of this. Okay, here, so we're going to go back to Capibara, and let's look at, so we've got plugins, we've got a couple different options here for right now, the VS Code extension, whatever, blah, blah. We have documentation. So this stuff is all basically kind of more or less tells you the kind of header folder file structure thing. And if you didn't notice, for example, like stdio, when we went digging in the Capi, was basically like ARPA. For example, ARPA is another header. So slashes basically indicate a nested subfolder effectively. And so you have like, and then your functions and whatnot. Meta literally just basically gives a little bit of information about the header file itself. And you can also see what goes in meta. For example, the meta YAML files contain a summary. As I was showing you earlier, there's reference linking. So we can use that to kind of point at something else, which is pretty cool. And so this really is going to go into a kind of deep dive description of how all this is really coming together. So finally, we basically take all of this stuff. The repo can basically be processed by the Capibara processor. So this is actually linked to the Capibara processor, but if we go back, there is some documentation on the Capibara processor itself. Here. So basically, it takes a couple of parameters, but you can point it at the JSON, or you can point it at the directory containing the YAML descriptions, and then it'll output a capybara.json file. So using a bunch of GitHub actions and stuff like that, I've streamlined this to where as soon as someone makes a pull request or basically a commit goes straight into, as soon as a commit goes into the Capi repo on GitHub, a updated version of Capybara JSON gets built by the Capibara processor, and then that gets sent to the website where it can be basically distributed to clients, the plugins and whatnot. And also, again, made available on the website itself. So now we can look at the website itself, and I think it's actually a pretty good tool in and of itself. So let's look at that. Here we have the, again, same kind of list of things. So, like stdio, we can go digging through there. And then we have buff size or IOFBF or whatever. Again, using this kind of reference linking, we can really point at other places within the same, we can really hop around here. So this is really cool for understanding how all of this, all of these functions kind of tie together. And again, you can look up something like htons right here if you want to. And if htons uses, for example, or you can even see like, N2HS is a related function. I don't have any examples for this function right now, but you're welcome to contribute that. So go here, and then there we go, there's N2HS. You can look at this. This may not be defined yet. And if it's not defined, it'll just be like, hey, we don't have this yet, but the reference link is already there, so, help us out and contribute, right? So the point of all of this is really I want to spread the word about this project because I think that it has a lot of potential. Really the entire mission of Capibara, as it's stated in multiple places, for example here, is that it's designed to make C documentation more accessible to developers, academics, and students by lowering the barrier to entry for understanding and writing in C, and even just remembering, what htons does. So definitely, if you like Vim or VS Code or Emacs, check out those plugins. If you want to contribute a plugin, there's documentation for that. And really this kind of talks about what the Capybara JSON file looks like and how you can parse it for information. Again, there's a couple plugins that have already been built, so you can look at what those do. But all of this here is really kind of building a groundwork for how we can have a better developer experience writing C code. So this is the Capybara project. I also have some wonderful swag. If you want to check that out, I actually have the cup, and I'm actually wearing my Capybara shirt right now. So, you got to represent your own stuff, right? So this is the Capybara project, and like I said, I think it has a lot of potential. So definitely, if you want to contribute to this or really kind of understand a little bit more how this works, obviously, there's these particular documentations. Spread the word, because this is, I think, a really useful tool. And then finally, connect with me in the Discord channel. you know, if you want help building the plugin or, you know, just generally support the community altogether, we have a Discord channel that's also accessible right from the standard Capibara website here, right up here. So all this stuff is here. Like I said, this is kind of a passion project of mine that I'm really excited to share with everyone. So yeah, until next time.